Greetings from Guadalajara, and thank you for watching. Today, and likely more often in future videos, I'm doing this in English to include English-speaking folks. I have not yet learned how to add subtitles to the videos, so I hope Spanish speakers can at least get the gist of what I'm talking about, or what I'm going to talk about, which is a specific text of a book that is fundamental for radical behaviorists or Skinnerian behaviorists. And of course, I'm referring to Skinner's 1974 About Behaviorism. If I'm not mistaken, this is the original printed paperback version by Alfred A. Knopf, 1974. And the text I want to talk about appears very early in the book, on page 10 of this version, and which is the second page of chapter 1, entitled "The Causes of Behavior." So on the next page is the text I want to talk about. And for this reason, it might be viewed as a sort of opening gambit. And the text in question reads as follows, and I quote, "But where are these feelings and states of mind? Of what stuff are they made?" The traditional answer is that they are located in a world of non-physical dimensions, called the mind, and that they are mental. But another question then arises. How can a mental event cause or be caused by a physical one? Unquote. Of course, he was referring here implicitly, without naming it at that point, to Cartesian dualism. He used the label dualism without the qualifier Cartesian several times later in the book. But there, at that point, he was referring to Cartesian dualism, which is defined precisely by two theses. One, the ontological, metaphysical partition of substances into, or things, into material or physical on the one hand, and immaterial or non-physical on the other hand. And souls are the only immaterial things that exist. And the other thesis that defines Cartesian dualism is the causal interaction between these two kinds of substances. So it is crucial to understand that Cartesian dualism is defined by both theses, and these are logically independent of one another. So one can hold coherently one without the other. So I remember vividly when I read this rhetorical question. I was an undergrad sophomore in psychology in the late 1970s at the Catholic University, Andrés Bello in Caracas, Venezuela, and I was blown away. I thought, this is genius, brilliant, and I was convinced that Skinner had been the first to point it out. At that time, I regarded Skinner as an original philosophical thinker. And it was a turning point for me to become Skinner's bulldog, as it were, in my psychology school, too aggressively for my own good, but that's another issue. But at that point, this particular text convinced me that all the mentalistic psychology I was being taught at the time suffered from this seemingly fatal flaw, and thus could be swiftly rejected, leaving radical behaviorism as the only viable philosophy of psychology, and to this extent, the experimental analysis of behavior as the only viable scientific psychology. Years later, however, when I began delving into philosophy more deeply and extensively, I learned, to my disappointment for Skinner, that the very same point had already been made centuries ago to Descartes himself, talking about mid-17th century, by at least two of his contemporaries. One was Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia in Private Correspondence, that was much later published, and the other was made publicly in a set of objections to Descartes' Meditations, by Pierre Gassendi. And both had wondered the same. How could something immaterial move or efficiently cause something material, and vice versa, if moving requires physical contact, and physical contact in turn requires three-dimensional spatiality, which souls lacked, according to Descartes. Descartes replies to both were not convincing, did not convince his critics because they make the matter even more confusing. And I would say this was a major reason why his dualism was not as influential in philosophy as many believe. In fact, his defense of rationalism is widely regarded, not universally, but widely regarded as, in philosophy, as a failure. The more influential formulation of rationalism was Kant's transcendental idealism, almost 1.5 centuries after Descartes' Meditations, which of course was not Cartesian dualistic. In fact, Kant was very critical of Descartes' form of rationalism. So beware to not view transcendental idealism as a dualistic proposal. In any case, I don't mean, of course, to accuse Skinner of plagiarism or improper appropriation or anything like that. I'm very willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in this regard and assume that he thought of this independently on his own, and good for him. My disappointment, rather, was that he had reinvented the wheel or rediscovered fire, so to speak. So he was not as original a philosophical thinker as I took him to be. Moreover, this is the most widely discussed criticism of Cartesian dualism in the philosophy of mind. I remember being embarrassed in a class in philosophy when I mentioned that Skinner said this and that, and everyone else laughed, saying, "Dude, this is very old criticism." So I was very embarrassed, and for me and for Skinner equally. So I started to lose respect for Skinner as an original philosophical thinker, which for me was the beginning of my leaving radical behaviorism. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave any comments or questions you wish. Be safe and be well.